Deep in the western reaches of the forests of Domnitra, two men traveling down separate paths approach a juncture as they head westward. They have known of each other for some time, by skill, spell, or natural attunement to the world around them. It mattered not, and each had subtly, perhaps even subconsciously, matched their pace to that of the other. When each entered the small, semi-clear area that served as a juncture and place of rest for travelers, they easily found the other and took the measure of each other. The taller man was wearing a fully articulated suit of winged armor, standing well over 7.5 feet tall. The armor he wore was sleek, yet seemed to thrum with a barely contained might or force. The face of his helm was a work of mastercraft, as it was articulated and allowed the warrior within to express himself in that most mortal and normal of ways. And it did so as it looked at the other man staring at him, and the fact that at first he didn't see him. Not that the other man had been in any way stealthy, but merely due to how short he was. The man was a goblin, a bit taller and sturdier than most likely an enlightened, perhaps even one of the farm, the armored traveler must have thought. He wore simple yet rugged traveling clothes, with a hood and cloak, and carried an odd staff, perhaps a spear of some sort, with its 9 twisting tines extending from its top. The armored traveler took a moment to think, as something about this was not right, and a moment later the issue was clear to him. He had all but set the pace of approach to this juncture, and his stride was longer than the goblin was tall, and yet they had arrived not only in sync with one another, but this man looked no more tired than he did, which was to say, not at all. This man was far more than just a goblin. Before either could speak, the sound of a fire coming to life, and the closely following smell of freshly brewing cow and of roasting meat took their attention away from each other and to the man sitting across from the fire as it sat warming a grill with meats and a percolator of fresh cow. The man, an elf from the ears, seemed focused on the food that he was preparing, and it was of amount that made clear his desire for these travelers' company. Logs for each of them to sit on were already in place, with a trunk for the armored traveler and a much smaller log for the goblin. As they began to approach the fire, which was on the far side of the clearing where they had entered, they drew closer to one another, still in step, and exchanged names. "Kana," said the taller man, nodding towards the goblin. "Scribe Arst," said the shorter man, as he made long, bouncing strides, perfectly matching the other man's step effortlessly. With that, they neared the fire and for the first time the man at its opposite end seemed to take notice of the approaching pair. "Please, gentlemen, join me. I have this fine food and drink, and would like to share my bounty with both of you." The elf had not raised his face, for he was too focused on his cooking, but his tone was warm, and to both men, strangely familiar. As both men glanced at each other one last time, the elf looked up with a smile on his face and gestured for them to take their seats before going back to his cooking. It was then that both men confirmed their suspicions and sat in relative confidence in their own safety. And having just sat down to break bread with Verisar Skychild, son of the divine royal family and pantheon of Criterion, that confidence was well placed. "Thank you for your timely arrival." A wry smile spread across his lips as he continued. "I bother and interrupt your travels only to expedite you to your eventual and mutual destination. After all," again he raised his face to study the two men sitting across from him, "you two are seeking the same man." As one, both turned and nearly exclaimed, but then their minds both went into overdrive, deducing and figuring out how this fact and its implications impacted the identity and thus the trustworthiness of the other man. Within a moment, the armored man, who identified himself as Kanar, smiled and asked what generation of farm elite he was sharing a fire with. And the Chris Dawn Goblin Scry Arst only reply was to what a tragedy it would be to get lost in reminiscing when there was work of a godly notice to be done. Both as one turned back to the god in question, whose smile was both honest and mirthful. Raising a hand and snapping his fingers, both men turned back again as they heard something materialize relatively close behind where they were sitting. It was a spaceship, a prospector model, generally used for in-system travel or between ships. Sometimes they were used as long-distance ships by the more ageless and patient races, but this one looked heavily customized. And considering the source, its looks were more likely just a facade to cover the more extreme tweaks and improvements this vessel has received. Been a project for a few decades or so, maybe centuries, Verisar began. You see, the Teltekians, they have a tradition from long in their past, apparently before they made it to the stars even, of overpowering their land and personal conveyances. Supercars is what they were originally called, and I thought it a wonderful tradition to honor in my own way. He gestured to the craft. Her name is the Speculator. She has a cog drive and should hold a cruising speed of nearly 250. That makes her one of the fastest ships in the realms, and she has all the amenities for your travels to come. Pre-programmed with the nearest cog station to where Han is. From there, you'll have just a short span of 5 light years to cross. All I'm asking is I get her back in one piece. Looking at their new means of travel, both men barely had to glance at one another before agreeing to make all efforts to, of course, return the craft. Discussing a few details about the ship over the food Verisar had prepared, both Kanar and Ars finished their plates and drained the last of the cow Verisar had brewed for them, and then boarded the speculator and prepared to set off, using the codes and keys given to them by Verisar to secure the vessel to their control and set the proper course in its systems. Moments later, and with an audible pop, the ship vanished, translocating into high orbit before engaging its cog drive for the jump to come. Verisar sat, now alone, finishing his own cow and wished the men safe travels, and silently drew odds on never getting the speculator back. With a smile and shaking his head at the futility of even asking, and now his minor nudge to keep things and affairs moving as they needed to be now done, he faded from the clearing as the fires snuffed out, only warm coals remaining at the bottom of the fire pit, casting the softest of glows for a few moments before fading away, as the heat producing it expended itself, leaving the clearing as quiet and undisturbed as it had ever been. On a space station far from Jam'mar, Han and his crew continued the efforts of past months to restore the station's various systems and functions. The station's previous owners, a band of pirates of less than talented individuals, had pillaged many subsystem parts and other items in their ignorance, seemed non-critical, but in reality had governed and controlled many of the advanced internal functions that the station was designed to manage. The station, which sits on the edge of a system-sized storm cloud of cosmic-grade destructive energies, serves as the only means in or out of the system at all, as well as the control center for all the substation and their functions in that system. A massive, star-powered, and operating with the various planets and moons within as nothing more than fancy gears factory. It was through further efforts of politics and favors assured that the system was granted to Han's ownership, and its status as a rare, sovereign, wild realm meant that he would be able to leverage the might of the council law itself to ensure that their system's independence from any one faction within the realms, as to avoid becoming a target of all the rest. However, they needed to get these repairs completed as soon as possible, as that neutral status would depend on their ability to use some of the production capabilities to produce trade goods and materials for sale equally amongst interested buyers. If they could establish a reputation as an open and fair market and source, it would afford them a great deal of latitude in how they could proceed otherwise. If they could repair the damage to the station, they would have one of the most advanced and capable manufacturing bases in all of the realms. While the pirates had only focused on the high amounts of the nearly invaluable star metal that they could sell off to the ancient empire, this system could do so much more. To take that star metal and craft entire fleets if properly configured. It was capable of every scale of production and manufacture, from personal pocket watches for halflings to interstellar craft and colony support equipment. This station, and their verified claim to its ownership, was set to bring them under the hostile gaze of the ancient empire at the very least, and if not many more who would desire the enormous advantage that this system would bring to their power base. Fortunately for Han and his crew, the defensive systems had barely been touched, and what had been done was easily mended. Soon, they were able to work in comfort, knowing that while the factory systems were not anywhere near being restored, the outer defensive weapons, the multi-celestial sensor systems that guided them, and the myriad other shields and fields that the creators of this place, the ancient and eminent Analar, had set to preserve and protect their work, were operating at full power and function within a matter of days. So, several months later, with nearly a third of the damage either repaired, mitigated, or otherwise dealt with, the sounds of invasion klaxons blaring haphazardly across the hundreds of miles of station were a shock to all involved. In the minutes following, as the crew made their way to the command center, which was still on board their docked ship, the Night Rock, each made contact with Han and each other, forming a picture of what was happening. Someone had tried to teleport into the station, and then, having been rebuffed by the defenses, tried several hundred more times in the minutes it had taken them all to gather. Each attempt was different, and each was equally easily stopped. So far, the intruder had not even breached the first layer of 9 security protocols that managed and protected teleportation. Next, an attempt to open a manual airlock nearby. Again, when the codes and commands were rejected, a series of rapid-fire brute force attempts to trick or force the airlock open followed. The crew began to ready their weapons, knowing that such a determined foe would not be held at bay even by defenses like these forever. Then suddenly, the airlock opened, and a lighted path to a meeting place was illuminated in the dark space outside the station. All turned to see Han with his hand on the controls. Wordlessly, Han merely nodded to the image of the now guest floating into the airlock, and as that guest waited for gravity to pull him to the floor, the info card that popped up identifying him as none other than Nick Ammar, Lord Protector of the Analar. Everyone immediately checked their gear twice more. Nick was a known entity to Han and his crew, and he was not to be trusted. They had never met, as it were, but as former ranking members of Criterion's Black Op division, Han and most of the rest of the crew were at least marginally aware of the powerhouse that was walking its way towards the empty storage bay. Sighing about how the gods in the Analar were too foolish to even know how to knock or send a forewarning before showing up, Han, flanked by Maz Noah and Nada, began to make his way to the meeting. Maz Noah entered to begin discussions with the Lord Protector of the Analar at the instruction of Han, who felt her fair face would serve as a better point of contact than his grisly visage. However, within a minute of her opening discussion, the Lord Protector had made clear his intention to reclaim this ancient work of Analar artifice for its creators. This, of course, caused Han to storm directly in, and before he had crossed even 10 yards of the massive storage bay towards its center, where the meeting was taking place, Gryphon'sLibrary had expanded to his full 15-foot height, and had a sword longer than he was tall, drawn and ready to strike at Han. Han, for his part, had vanished in a bloom of light as he summoned and merged with his mecha battlesuit, now standing 20 foot tall and holding forth a near mere copy of the blade the Lord Protector was now pointing at him. The Lord Protector demanded enraged to the origin of Han's blade, who had dared to attempt to mimic one of his great works. Just as it seemed his violence was about to burst into life, Nada made his presence known, informing the Lord Protector that he had given the blade to Han exclusively for his mecha's suit use. The effect of this was immediate, as Nick not only dismissed his blade, but returned to a much more reasonable height, almost immediately, seeming to be shrinking under the gaze of the far smaller Old Beard Dwarf. Rendering apologies for interfering in the affairs of others, Nick waved his hand, and with it a soft thrumming vibration began across the station. He had just replaced the initiator module, and with it, the full auto-repair systems of the station sprang into proper and full life. Fading from sight as the airlock opened and shut once more in rapid fashion, Gryphon'sLibrary left the station and its inhabitants better off, but utterly confused as to what exactly had just happened. Confirming the rate of repairs with Navi after returning to the command center, Han was pleased to find out it would be less than 2 weeks before the station was totally repaired. Next would be the challenge of staffing the station, as well as it was capable of full automation. Far more could be accomplished with the presence of a few personnel to help manage different lines of product and development. A week later, long-range systems detected a ship was heading in their direction at high speed and would arrive in but a matter of days. No contact had been made yet, and the vessel would have otherwise been undetectable due to its hull makeup if it were not moving at well over 200 foe. And only the fact that it was on a direct line to them had made detection possible even at those speeds. Han and crew began to load and prep a number of designs and specifications into the system for immediate production once all the systems went online, as they awaited these newest guests, and prepared to defend themselves if they should prove less than friendly. I do hope you've enjoyed these quick and current examples of how the Divines will pursue their own, or greater goals sometimes, by the most direct means available: personal interdiction and interaction. Meddling in the affairs of mortals is often done subtly, but just as often we'll see a god interject themselves to ensure the proper weight to an endeavor or project is observed or otherwise carried through on. The level as to which the gods will work together on any one project is always varied, as their goals and specific ambitions beyond the fulfillment of their duties as gods tend to pull them in different directions. While they are among the most powerful beings in the realms, the court of the gods is a place where the deeds and victories of arts both subtle and gross are but coin to be spent in the furtherance of goals, both personal and philanthropic. When hands of destiny are in play, the stakes only grow by orders of magnitude, as not only is there a threat or some other hazard at play, it is often the case that the exact nature of the threat the hands have been called to deal with is either beyond or in some other way not appropriate for the gods to be taking the lead in handling. So, moves made in such times, especially with those thought to be or confirmed as hands of destiny, is a dangerous thing that could end everything if mishandled. So, as our tales continue, be on the lookout for the more subtle hand of the divine, and be not surprised if in the course of our heroes and their story, more encounters with the divine occur, for the gods of the realms are active and resolute in their duties to both the realms and their own worshippers. Until you next make your way back to the library for your next entry, I have been the recorder, and I wish well all my perceptive patrons, regular visitors, and of course, new guests. See you in the next entry of Intro to the Realms. And by the 9 and 4, be well, take care of yourselves, and each other. If you'd like to contribute to the further exploration and explanation of the realms, please consider leaving a comment, a like, and sharing the video around. I read all the comments and make efforts to reply to each. Thank you for helping to grow the channel, and know I look forward to each and every one of your comments. Other methods of support can be found in the channel's description. Thank you for watching,